Okay, we're going to pick up where we left off. So all of this, the railroads, people moving west, cowboys, farmers, miners, had a huge impact on Native Americans. And so the first thing we want to do is a little review of different stages. After the American Revolution, Native Americans were treated as defeated peoples. And there were basically two schools of thought. A lot of Americans just wanted to obliterate Native Americans. Some more enlightened Americans wanted Native Americans to assimilate into American culture and just become American. Someone like Thomas Jefferson had this kind of idea, for example. That worked to an extent. You know, you think of some of the civilized tribes, the 5 civilized tribes, groups like the Cherokee, who had adopted many white ways by the time we get to the 1820s. But that didn't seem to stop whites from wanting to move them off tribal lands, especially, for example, the Cherokee in Georgia. So we move on to stage 2, where, led by Andrew Jackson and subsequent presidents, there's a conscious effort to remove Native Americans from the east to the west, from the east of the Mississippi to the west of the Mississippi. By the 1850s, we enter a time period that some people call containment, and basically sign a treaty with Native Americans, especially in the Great Plains, where the federal government tries to kind of restrict Native Americans to certain areas and make some promises about not encroaching upon those areas. And by 1854, that's broken with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and clearly white settlement is going to go across the Great Plains. And then with gold and silver strikes of the 1850s and the 1860s, people spill over into the Great Plains. Stage 4, obviously what's going to happen in the late 1850s and the 1860s, kind of during and right after the Civil War, as more and more people move west, there's more and more conflict. The most vicious one is the Sioux Wars that take place kind of right at the back end of the Civil War and right after the Civil War. And stage 4 in the federal government's policy is to set aside land for Native Americans. This land isn't particularly desirable, but it's a place that Native Americans could feel protected from white encroachments. So this policy is called the reservation policy, and it lasts for about 20-30 years. The Plains Indians are relocated to 2 big reservations in Oklahoma and Dakota. And really, it doesn't really solve anything. There's continued westward expansion. There's more fights between people expanding west and Native Americans. And you can see by the reality of what happened. So every red X on that map is a major battle between whites and Native Americans in the second half of the 1800s. The 2 big ones there we'll talk about. Little Bighorn was, of course, where General Custer met his end, and the Battle of Wounded Knee kind of signifies the last battle on the frontier, the symbolic kind of last defeat of Native Americans. And kind of a similar map, but this shows you federal forts that were built to protect Western settlers. In the late 1800s, you can see the reservations that have been set aside. Stage 5 comes in the 1880s. There's a book in 1881 written by a woman called Helen Hunt Jackson. It's called A Century of Dishonor. And the book, as its title implies, deals with about 100 years of history from the end of the Revolutionary War to the 1880s. And her thesis is that the federal government has treated Native Americans deplorably and has lied, cheated, and stolen from Native Americans. And a lot of Americans kind of realized, where this was all going. The buffalo population was almost extinct. Native Americans were declining, and some Americans wanted to kind of step in and protect them, if you like. And the way they did that was kind of not the way that we might think. Congress passed the Dawes Severalty Act of 1887, and this is on Google Classroom, and I'd like you to take a look at it and answer the questions that go with it. Basically what it does is it dissolves reservations, it dissolves tribes, and it tries to give land to Native Americans in the form of homesteads. Kind of a similar concept to the Homestead Act. And you see the cartoon there. Look, Running Wolf, you've got to stop daydreaming and start plowing. And Running Wolf really doesn't want to be a farmer. He wants to be a Native American. And so to us, kind of in the modern day, this is not very culturally sensitive. At the time, this was seen as a very enlightened kind of policy that, to kind of force Native Americans to assimilate. If we take a long-term view of this, this was not a successful policy. Essentially what's going to happen is that, yes, the reservations are split up and land is given to some Indians, but land is also going to be taken by whites. So out of 138 million acres given to Indians under the Dawes Act, by 1934, 86 million, I would say about 2/3, is in white hands. So during the 1930s, the government is again going to reverse itself and again going to set aside land for reservations and tribal ownership. And this is during the New Deal in the 1930s. It's called the Indian New Deal. And you can see, I like this map just because it's very colorful and very clear. And it shows you the gradual loss of land of Native Americans. I want to pick on the Sioux here just to show you what the reservation policy meant. So there's the Great Sioux Reservation in 1868, and that would have been signed by federal treaty. By 1877, they'd lost some of that land because gold had been found in the Black Hills. And what we see here, by 1889, is how much land has been lost. And this would be, a similar story would be told in Oklahoma, where, again, land had been set aside in terms of reservation, and anything that wasn't claimed by Native Americans was up for grabs for whites, and whites would take that land. Obviously, the more and more land that Native Americans lost, the more desperate and almost apocalyptic they became. And by the end of the 1800s, there was kind of almost like a messianic moment in Native American tribes. And on the Great Plains, the Sioux and some other tribes had been practicing something called the ghost dance, which was kind of a ritualistic dance where the Sioux were kind of reenacting their belief that the world would end and whites would disappear, and they would get, and Native Americans would be restored, if you like. Obviously, whites were very nervous about what they saw with the ghost dance, and this nervousness turned tragic when U.S. troops attacked Sioux Indians at the Battle of Wounded Knee, and this is a kind of symbolic end to kind of the frontier wars of the late 1800s. And the soldiers, what you take away from this is just the brutality of the U.S. soldiers toward the Indians, particularly the women and children. And these are some images. And one of the other things that we get from all of this, of course, is the kind of the Hollywood focus on the Wild West. And by the late 1800s, you were more likely to see a Native American in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. Another big impact of the West is a historical thesis. In 1893, in the early 1890s, the United States declared the frontier closed. The United States, 1890, a census report declared the frontier had closed. And in 1893, a young Frederick Jackson Turner delivered a thesis called The Significance of the Frontier in American History. Historians have continued to debate this thesis, the theory that the West played a special role in the development of the American nation.